I remember the day clearly. I had driven down to visit my daughter, Sophie, hoping for a quiet afternoon together, maybe some coffee and a long chat about life. But as soon as I stepped out of my car, something felt off. Brian's neighborhood, usually calm and orderly, seemed different. There was tension in the air, a subtle unease I couldn't quite place. I had always trusted my instincts, and they were screaming at me that something was wrong. I decided to take a short walk while Sophie finished her homework, just to clear my head. That's when I met Lisa, the housemaid from next door. She seemed nervous at first, fidgeting with her apron, but then she looked straight at me and whispered something I will never forget. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The words she said about Brian hit me like a thunderbolt. Everything I thought I knew about him, every memory I held, suddenly felt like a lie. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to convince myself that Lisa was mistaken or exaggerating. But deep down, a cold certainty settled over me. This wasn't just a small betrayal or a harmless secret, it was something much darker, something that changed the way I saw my past and my life with Brian. I tried to steady my breathing, forcing myself to focus on what Sophie was doing inside, but my mind kept replaying Lisa's words over and over. I remembered all the quiet moments when Brian had seemed distant, the subtle ways he had kept secrets, and the uneasy feeling that had gnawed at me during our marriage. I had tried to ignore it back then, telling myself I was imagining things, but now everything made sense. The truth Lisa had revealed didn't just shock me, it demanded action, and yet I wasn't sure how to confront it without losing control. Standing there in the bright afternoon sun, I felt a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. My hands were clammy, my chest tight. The world I thought I understood had shifted beneath me, leaving me off balance. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the only thing I could do was listen, absorb the truth, and plan my next steps carefully. I glanced toward Sophie's window, reminding myself that I needed to stay strong for her. Whatever this secret meant for Brian and for my past, I couldn't let it destroy me. I had to hold on to my courage, even if it was shaking inside me. That day, the world I knew ended, but a new path began, a path that would test my strength, my patience, and my sense of justice in ways I could never have imagined. And as I walked back towards Sophie, every step felt heavy but determined. I had seen the truth, and I knew that nothing could ever make me unsee it. I couldn't stop thinking about what Lisa had told me. As I sat in Sophie's room later that evening, memories of my life with Brian flooded back, and the pieces started falling into place in a way that made my stomach turn. He had always been charming in public, the perfect husband in front of our friends and neighbors, but behind closed doors, it was different. The quiet manipulation, the subtle digs at my confidence, the way he made me feel guilty for asking for simple things, all of it came rushing back. I had brushed it off then, convincing myself that love required patience, but now, with Lisa's words echoing in my mind, I could see the pattern clearly. Lisa had spoken carefully, almost hesitantly, as if she feared I might react badly. She revealed that Brian had been hiding a relationship with someone very close to me, someone I trusted without question. The thought felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I couldn't believe he could do this, not with someone I cared about, not with someone in my family. The betrayal cut deep, far deeper than anything I had imagined possible. I felt anger bubbling up, sharp and raw, but it was mixed with a heavy sadness, a feeling of disbelief that the person who had once promised to love me had used lies to manipulate his entire life around his own selfish desires. I tried to breathe, to steady my racing thoughts, but every detail Lisa shared replayed in my mind. How long had this been going on? How many times had I been lied to, made to feel small, while he carried on with this secret life? The questions had no easy answers, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't stay passive anymore. The anger inside me wasn't just for the lies themselves, it was for the years he had stolen from me, the trust he had broken, and the sense of safety he had destroyed. And yet, amid all the confusion and hurt, a plan began to form. I realized that my pain didn't have to be wasted. I didn't have to stay a victim of Brian's games. If I approached this carefully, I could take control, protect Sophie, and make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of anger, it was about reclaiming my dignity, showing him that betrayal doesn't go unanswered, and finally putting an end to the fear and manipulation I had endured for so long. That night, as I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, I felt a strange mix of resolve and apprehension. The hurt was still there, raw and burning, but beneath it was a quiet determination. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that for the first time in years, I had the clarity and strength to walk it. Brian had underestimated me, and that mistake was about to become the first step in a journey that would change both our lives forever. I knew I couldn't rush into anything. Confronting Brian without proof would only backfire, and I needed clarity before I could act. So I decided to investigate quietly, keeping everything under the radar. The last thing I wanted was for him to suspect I knew, so I moved carefully, observing, asking subtle questions, and paying attention to small details that most people would overlook. Lisa became my unexpected ally. At first, she was hesitant, afraid of getting in trouble, but I reassured her I only wanted the truth. Slowly, she began sharing small pieces of information, mundane details that, when put together, painted a much darker picture. The way Brian spent his evenings, the phone calls he tried to hide, the financial transactions that didn't make sense, everything added up. Lisa's insight was invaluable because she saw things from the inside, things I could never have known on my own. The tension grew as I pieced together the puzzle. Every time Brian passed by or spoke to me innocently, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. He seemed completely unaware that I was uncovering his secrets, smiling and talking like nothing had ever happened. That made the deception feel even more cruel, knowing he could act normal while hiding something so devastating. I had to remind myself to stay patient, to keep my emotions in check, and to record every detail carefully. Over the next few weeks, the evidence began to mount. I found clear proof of a double life, documents, receipts, and small habits that Brian had tried desperately to keep hidden. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just emotional manipulation, it involved deliberate deception, secrecy, and selfish choices that affected everyone around him. I realized how deep his lies went, how long he had been playing this role while pretending to be a devoted father and ex-husband. It was painful to see the truth so clearly. Every discovery hurt, but each one also strengthened my resolve. I could finally connect the dots, understanding not only what he had done, but also how he had manipulated those closest to me. Knowing the truth didn't make me weaker, it gave me control. I was no longer in the dark, and that knowledge became my power. By the time I had everything I needed, I felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The pieces were in place, and now it was only a matter of timing. I had to be careful, strategic, and calm. Brian still believed he was untouchable, still unaware that the life he had built on lies was starting to crumble quietly under my watchful eye. And in that quiet observation, I realized something important. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was reclaiming my power, preparing for the moment when the truth would finally come to light. Sitting alone in my quiet kitchen that evening, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The evidence I had gathered against Brian was undeniable, but knowing the truth didn't make it any easier to process. My mind kept replaying memories from our marriage, memories I had once cherished but now cut like glass. I remembered the nights I stayed up comforting him when he claimed he was stressed, the weekends I gave up to attend his family events, the countless sacrifices I had made so he could succeed while I quietly put my own dreams aside. It hurt to realize how little of that had been appreciated. Brian had taken my loyalty for granted, using my love as a shield to cover his own selfish actions. Every lie he had told, every secret he had kept, felt like a personal attack, not just on me, but on the life I thought we were building together. I had trusted him completely, believing in the bond we shared, only to find that he had been living a parallel life right under my nose. The betrayal wasn't just shocking, it was devastating, shaking the foundation of everything I had believed about love, trust, and family. I couldn't help but question myself. Had I missed the signs? Was I naive for believing him so fully? I thought about all the times I had defended him to friends and family, excusing his behavior and convincing myself that I was being patient and understanding. Now, all of that felt like a cruel joke. My heart ached not only from what he had done, but from the realization that my trust, my devotion, had been used against me. And yet, beneath the heartbreak, a spark of clarity began to grow. I realized that my worth wasn't defined by Brian's actions or his betrayal. I had given love, patience, and loyalty freely, and that didn't make me weak, it showed strength. The anger I felt was natural, but it also fueled something else, the understanding that I didn't have to remain a victim. I had the power to take control of the situation, to protect myself and Sophie, and to make sure that the consequences of his actions couldn't be ignored. As I sat there, alone but thinking clearly, I knew that this pain was not the end, it was a turning point. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the anger, they were all part of a journey that would force me to grow stronger, smarter, and more determined. I wasn't just processing betrayal, I was preparing myself for the steps I would take next. The audience, if they had ever trusted someone blindly and been let down, would understand the rawness of this moment, the universal ache of discovering that someone you loved most could hurt you so deeply. In that silence, with Sophie asleep in the next room, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I had been wronged, but I wasn't powerless. The storm inside me was only the beginning, and I was ready to face it head-on. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't let my emotions rule me. The anger and betrayal were strong, but acting impulsively would only make things worse. If I wanted Brian to truly face the consequences, I had to be smart, careful, and deliberate. Revenge wouldn't be about screaming or confrontation, it would be about strategy, timing, and control. I needed him to realize the truth without giving him a chance to twist it or manipulate the situation again. The first rule I set for myself was protecting Sophie. Nothing I did could put her in the middle of this chaos. She was innocent, and I wasn't going to let Brian's lies or my actions harm her in any way. That meant keeping everything hidden from him, moving quietly, and thinking several steps ahead. I started by planning small moves, subtle questions, careful observations, and interactions designed to reveal his reactions without giving away my intentions. Every little detail counted, and I kept meticulous notes, knowing that patience would be my greatest weapon. I also began using Lisa as a quiet ally. Her knowledge of Brian's daily habits and secrets was invaluable. Together, we looked for inconsistencies in his stories, patterns in his behavior, and ways to gather proof that would be undeniable. Every piece of information gave me a clearer picture of how deep his deception went, and it allowed me to anticipate his moves before he even realized I was watching. It felt empowering, like I was slowly taking back the control that he had stolen from me over the years. With each passing day, I noticed a change in myself. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted me began to fade, replaced by focus and determination. I no longer felt like a victim of Brian's lies. Instead, I felt capable, alert, and confident. The planning itself became a kind of therapy. I was reclaiming the power he had taken by learning, observing, and preparing. I could see how each calculated step would eventually expose him, forcing him to face the reality of what he had done. I even started to play subtle psychological games, making casual remarks or asking questions that seemed innocent but were carefully designed to test his reactions. Brian, completely unaware that I was orchestrating all of this, behaved as he always did, arrogant, confident, and careless. Each misstep he made, each slip of information, only strengthened my plan and confirmed that I was on the right path. By the end of the week, I could feel the tide shifting. I was no longer defined by betrayal or heartbreak, I was defined by action, intelligence, and control. The journey ahead would still require patience, but I finally understood that true revenge wasn't about anger, it was about precision. And in that realization, I felt a quiet, powerful sense of satisfaction. For the first time in years, I was in charge of my life again. The moment finally came when I knew I could take the first step. I had gathered enough proof, enough details that could no longer be ignored, and I decided to expose one of Brian's lies carefully, to someone he trusted deeply. It wasn't reckless, it was precise. I chose my timing and my audience carefully, making sure Sophie was safe and unaware, and that I could watch Brian's reaction without tipping him off too soon. I invited his closest friend, Mark, over for coffee, acting casual and lighthearted. As we talked, I dropped subtle hints about Brian's secret, guiding the conversation so that Mark started asking questions. I didn't reveal everything at once, I only gave enough for the truth to start surfacing naturally. Watching Mark's eyes widen as the pieces came together was almost satisfying. I could feel the tension building, the sense of disbelief settling over him just as I had imagined. Soon enough, the news reached Brian. He confronted me later that evening, his face a mix of anger, fear, and shock. I stayed calm, meeting his gaze steadily while he tried to twist his words, deny everything, and make me doubt myself. But I had anticipated this. I had the proof ready, and his attempts to regain control only revealed how fragile his world really was. For the first time in years, I saw a crack in the armor he had built around himself. His confidence wavered, and it was intoxicating to witness. The ripple effect of that small move was immediate. People who trusted Brian began questioning him, noticing inconsistencies they had overlooked before. I didn't have to say much, the truth was starting to do the work for me. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every pause in his demeanor confirmed that the careful strategy was working. Brian had underestimated me, and now the consequences of his lies were beginning to show in small but undeniable ways. Even as I watched, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. This was only the beginning, the first strike in a carefully constructed plan. I wasn't acting out of vengeance alone, I was asserting control, reclaiming the power he had stolen, and making sure that the consequences were unavoidable. As I went to bed that night, I felt the tension in the air, the sense that the next steps were already falling into place. Brian's reaction had confirmed one thing: he was vulnerable, and I had the upper hand. The audience, if they were following along, would understand the thrill and the anticipation, the knowledge that one small action could unravel a carefully maintained life of lies. And in that quiet moment, I allowed myself a small, confident smile. The first strike had worked. The next moves would be even more decisive, and I was ready to see Brian's carefully constructed world crumble under the weight of truth. As Brian's reactions grew more tense, I realized I didn't have to face this alone. Lisa had already proven to be a valuable ally, but I discovered there were others quietly affected by Brian's lies and manipulation. One of his former colleagues, Anna, reached out after hearing about the situation. She had experienced his deceit in her own way, and like me, she wanted to see the truth come to light. Slowly, a small network of trust began to form around me, people who understood the damage he had caused and were willing to help, carefully and quietly. I learned quickly that revenge was easier, and stronger, when you had support. Together, we shared information, compared observations, and planned moves that would hit Brian where it hurt most, without putting Sophie or anyone else in harm's way. I realized that loyalty and solidarity gave me strength I hadn't felt since the marriage ended. It wasn't just about exposing Brian anymore, it was about reclaiming the life he had tried to control and showing him that his actions had consequences far beyond what he could manipulate. Every interaction became part of a subtle strategy. Lisa helped me track Brian's routines and habits, while Anna provided insight into his workplace behavior and financial dealings. We coordinated small actions that seemed innocent on the surface but slowly built pressure on him. Each carefully timed conversation, each small revelation, added weight to the truth that was beginning to surface. It was quiet, precise, and undeniably effective. I also noticed a change in myself. Having allies reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the fear and isolation Brian had cultivated over the years could be replaced with support and strength. I felt empowered in a way I hadn't expected. The anger that had once consumed me was now focused, sharpened by collaboration and careful planning. I was no longer just reacting, I was orchestrating, with a team that shared my goal of exposing him completely. Even as we worked in silence, I could see the effect on Brian. His control was slipping. Subtle shifts in his behavior, the way people looked at him differently, the tension building around him, it all confirmed that the plan was working. I stayed composed, knowing each small step brought us closer to the moment when the full truth would be undeniable. By the end of that week, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The support I had found didn't just strengthen my plan, it strengthened me. I could face Brian's lies with confidence, knowing I had allies who understood the stakes and shared the same resolve. The audience, if they were following my story, would see that true empowerment doesn't come from acting alone, it comes from solidarity, trust, and the courage to confront betrayal with support. And for the first time since everything began, I felt unstoppable. The day finally came when I couldn't wait any longer. I had all the proof I needed, every detail documented and verified. I knew I had to confront Brian directly, face to face, and make him see that his lies were no longer hidden. I called him to meet at a neutral place, pretending it was just a talk, but inside, I was ready to stand my ground. As soon as he arrived, I could see the confidence in his posture, the arrogance he always carried. But this time, it didn't intimidate me. I stayed calm, keeping my voice steady as I began. I laid out everything I had discovered, his double life, the hidden relationships, the manipulations. I spoke slowly, clearly, leaving no room for doubt. I watched as his expression changed from surprise to disbelief, then to anger. He tried immediately to gaslight me, saying I was imagining things, twisting words, accusing me of exaggeration. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond with emotion or let him drag me into his lies. Every claim he made was met with facts I had gathered, evidence he couldn't argue against. I saw him falter, the first real crack in the mask he had worn for so long. For years, he had controlled the narrative, but now the truth was undeniable. The tension between us was electric. I could feel it in the way he clenched his fists, in the tightness of his jaw, in the shaky tone that betrayed his anger. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I simply stated the truth, calmly and firmly, letting it sink in. Every lie he had used to manipulate people was now laid bare. The power balance had shifted completely. I could see him trying to threaten me, trying to intimidate me into silence, but it didn't work. I was prepared for this. The fear and doubt he once planted in me had been replaced by confidence and determination. I stood my ground, unwavering, and in that moment, I felt a rush of relief and empowerment. I wasn't just confronting him, I was reclaiming the years of control he had taken from me. By the time the conversation ended, Brian was visibly shaken. He could no longer hide behind charm or deceit. I walked away from that meeting with a sense of closure I hadn't felt in years. The audience, following this story, would feel that same catharsis, the satisfaction of seeing someone finally stand up to betrayal, the triumph of truth over lies, and the power of facing fear with courage. That day, I learned something important: confronting betrayal directly, with preparation and clarity, doesn't just expose the wrongdoer, it frees the one who has been wronged. I had taken back my voice, my strength, and my control. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly unstoppable. After confronting Brian, I knew the next step had to be decisive. I couldn't let him continue hiding behind lies while everyone else remained in the dark. I started by sharing what I had uncovered with people who mattered most, his closest friends, some family members, and a few neighbors who had always respected him. I didn't exaggerate or twist anything, I laid out the facts clearly, calmly, and without emotion, letting the evidence speak for itself. The reaction was immediate. People who had trusted him began questioning everything, noticing the small inconsistencies they had ignored before. His carefully crafted image started to crumble in real time. I watched from a distance as whispers spread, conversations grew tense, and the people who had once defended him now looked at him with doubt and disappointment. Brian's control slipped further with every revelation. He tried to explain, to deny, even to manipulate, but the weight of truth was too heavy to hide. Seeing him falter brought a strange mix of emotions. I wasn't celebrating cruelty, I wasn't trying to hurt him for the sake of it. I was witnessing justice, a natural consequence of his own choices. The satisfaction I felt was different from anger, it was quiet and deep, a recognition that honesty and integrity had won where deception had failed. For years, he had believed he could manipulate everyone, hide his mistakes, and escape accountability. Now, everything was unraveling, and it was precise, measured, and fair. As I observed the fallout, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't known was possible. The burden of secrecy and fear I had carried for so long was lifting. Each conversation that Brian had to explain himself, each glance of doubt from someone who once trusted him, reinforced that the plan I had followed wasn't just effective, it was just. There was no need for confrontation beyond what I had already done, strategy and truth were enough. At the same time, I noticed a shift in myself. I wasn't defined by the betrayal anymore. The strength I had discovered through planning, patience, and careful action had changed me. I had taken a situation designed to break me and turned it into proof of my resilience. The audience, following my story, could feel that mix of shock and satisfaction, the realization that deceit always has consequences, and that standing up with clarity and courage can restore balance without violence. By the end of the day, Brian's lies had fully come to light. People who mattered were no longer deceived, and I had reclaimed not just my dignity, but my peace of mind. The quiet satisfaction of seeing the truth prevail, the recognition that justice doesn't always need anger or force, became my reward. Karma had taken its course in its own way, and I was left with the knowledge that integrity, patience, and courage had finally restored balance in a life that had been shaken by betrayal. After everything settled, I finally had the chance to focus on what truly mattered, Sophie. Reconnecting with her wasn't just about spending time together, it was about rebuilding trust, love, and a sense of safety that had been shaken for years. I watched her laugh again, heard her share her dreams, and felt the bond between us grow stronger than ever. There was no fear, no tension, just a mother and daughter reclaiming the life they deserved. As I reflected on the journey, I realized something important. The revenge I had carried out wasn't what made me strong. The power didn't come from exposing Brian or watching him face the consequences. My strength came from within, from rising above the betrayal, from refusing to let lies and deceit define who I was, and from choosing to act with patience, intelligence, and calm. I learned that true empowerment isn't about striking back blindly, it's about taking control of your own life and making decisions that protect what really matters. The months that followed were filled with quiet victories. I pursued the things I had put aside for Brian's sake. I spent time on work I loved, hobbies I had ignored, and building a life where Sophie felt safe and loved. Every choice I made reinforced the truth that I was capable, resilient, and in control. The betrayal that had once left me broken became the force that strengthened me, shaping a version of myself I was proud of. I also noticed the subtle changes in my own outlook. I no longer felt the need to dwell on anger or resentment. Instead, I carried a quiet confidence, a sense of justice that didn't need validation from others. Brian's downfall was complete, and yet I didn't need to celebrate it. The satisfaction came from knowing I had protected myself and my daughter, and that the consequences of his choices had played out naturally. Even as life returned to normal, I kept the lessons close. Trust is precious, but so is self-respect. Betrayal can hurt, but it can also reveal hidden strength. And most importantly, real empowerment comes from resilience, intelligence, and the courage to face difficult truths. Watching Sophie thrive reminded me that healing is possible, even after the deepest wounds. As I tucked her into bed one night, I paused and asked myself a question that still lingers: what would anyone do if they discovered that the person they trusted most was hiding the darkest secret? I didn't have to answer it for anyone else, only for myself. And my answer was clear: I faced the truth, protected those I loved, and emerged stronger. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was finally free. In the end, the betrayal didn't break me. It shaped me. And that realization, more than any revenge or confrontation, became my greatest victory.